Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of WN Movie Talk Podcast. I am your host Trev, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2015 biographical disaster pick Everest, starring Jason Clarke, Jake Gyllenhaal, Emily Watson, Sam Worthington, and a whole cast of other people, lots of them. But we'll get on and talk about them in a minute, because first of all I'd just like to say hello, welcome back. It's been a long time. Again, I'm here on my own today to discuss the movies. I'm also having problems with audio equipment, but I really wanted to get this podcast out, so I'm just recording it on the microphone on my phone. So hopefully it's not a horrible sound for you all. But if I didn't record this now, then all my notes would just become blurred notes and I wouldn't remember the film very much. Do you understand? Do you understand where I'm coming from? So yeah, it's 2024. There's quite a lot of good films out at the cinema at the moment, I've noticed. Lots of sort of comedy dramas. There's one I want to go and watch called The Holdovers, starring Paul Giamatti, and directed by one of my favourite directors, Alexander Payne. I quite like his films. He's done About Schmidt, Sideways, Election, loads of good things, and they're always a bit humorous. Downsizing, that's another one. So yeah, I just thought that I like the look of that, so I might try and pop to the cinema one evening this week to watch that, but I haven't watched it yet. What I have watched, me and the wife took the kids to the cinema on Sunday, just gone, to watch Wonka. Now, yeah, it was great fun, good film. The kids really enjoyed it. I think it's creators of Paddington, isn't it, who's done that, and they seem to be the best at reviving old franchises. You know, I think a lot of franchise films these days and a lot of remakes of old 70s kids films or whatever just tend to be crap, whereas they've, you know, I would never have dreamt that I'd like Paddington or Paddington 2, and I really enjoyed both of them, and Wonka is no different. So yeah, I've been really busy at the moment, and not really got around to watching a lot of films, even though my son and myself have watched all the Spider-Man films, because we got PS5 for Christmas for the family, and we've been playing the Spider-Man game. My son just wanted to watch all the films, so we started watching all the Spider-Man films. We basically just so far have watched the first 3 Sam Raimi films, and my takeaway from that actually is that Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin is possibly one of the best superhero villains to have graced the screen. Really menacing. Great actor, isn't he, Willem Dafoe? Also, another takeaway from that is that James Franco is such an appallingly bad actor. And I think there's a lot when I watch James Franco films. I think, how is he a star? What has he got? Because he just seems crap at acting. I don't know. Is that just me? But he certainly was shit in them films anyway. Apart from that, I've not really watched a lot. You know, I have been doing quite a bit of DVD collecting. I've been picking up cheap DVDs for flipping ages. I'm now into 4 shelf units, and I'm going to need a 5th one ever so soon. I'm picking them up cheap as cheerful, charity shops, recycling centres, all over the place really. And now, because I've got the PS5 and a 4K telly, I'm throwing 4Ks into the mix with the DVDs and Blu-rays. So there's a couple of videos over on YouTube. One did really well, and they always say strike while the iron's hot with YouTube. If it does, something does well, do it again. So I've done another one, and that done really crap. I barely got 50 views on it. YouTube is a strange entity, and it frustrates me at the moment. So I might just have a break from that and just concentrate for the time being on these podcasts again. Try and get this back up and running, because it's something I enjoy, as you know, talking about film. So today's film is Everest, so I thought I'd pose a question to our avid listeners over on Facebook. So if you are listening here and you're on Facebook, please come over and check WN Movie Talk on Facebook. It might even be WN Movie Talk Podcast, I can't remember. You'll find it. You'll see the logo, which is WN Movie Talk with 2 silhouetted heads talking. It's like they're talking about movies in front of a film strip. But yeah, go on over there to Facebook, have a look at that, because that's where I ask questions each month. So this month's question was best movies based on true life disasters. Now, I thought everyone was going to say Everest, to be honest, because my main followers from this podcast came from my hiking YouTube channel. And I thought, oh, this might be a bit too obvious and everyone will say it. But no, they didn't. My brother Robin messaged and said Summit or Nothing, which was the hiking channel. Hilarious, Robin, well done. Sean Ralston also said that one on YouTube about a guy trying to put a tent up in the wind and rain on Dartmoor. Thank you, Sean. Yep, on the same wavelength there as me bruv. Dean Harvey came in, Touching the Void for me. Now that's the story about Joe Simpson surviving in the Himalayas. I don't even know it was the Himalayas actually. He falls off a mountain, doesn't he? His mate has to cut the rope and he falls, but he survives and he gets out. Lives to tell the tale. Really great film. He's also, as I sort of told Dean in the messages, I said, yeah, a good film. Also, A Beckoning Silence is a good one too, which is Joe Simpson again telling the story of Tony Kurtz surviving on the Eiger. Now, Tony Kurtz on the Eiger is also a film called North Face, which is really good, a German movie. That's a really good one. Andy Hunt said Into the Wild, the true story of how not to go and live off the grid. A great film, directed by Sean Penn. All about McCandless, I can't remember his first name, but yeah, a chap, sort of a privileged lad, privileged family. He decides that he doesn't want their money and their wealth, and he's going to go into Alaska and hike. Another true story. Actually, another true story based on a book by John Krakauer, who features in Everest, and he actually wrote the book Into Thin Air, which is one of the books that sort of about this same disaster as Everest. So all ties in well. And again, yeah, so far it's all my hiking community is stepping up here. Gordon Jackson said 13 Day and 6 Days, couple of my favourites. Now, I didn't know what either of those films were. I had a Google. They do look quite interesting films. Cheers for that, Gordon. David Lynn Miller said Munich is an excellent film, and I think in the end the events depicted qualify as a disaster. I think you're probably right, David. Piero Canuti says Pain and Gain with Mark Wahlberg and The Rock. It's so insanely bizarre that halfway through it has to remind the audience that it's still a true story. The film had me howling throughout. I'm not entirely sure what that film is, but it definitely sounds like an interesting one to go and watch. I love a true story where you can't believe it's a true story. Nathan Kent says Sully springs to mind because of who doesn't love a bit of Tom Hanks. Jack Stokes says The Impossible, based on the story of the Belon Alvarez family, truly gripping. And then Gren Chiapra also says The Impossible was okay, all about the 2004 tsunami. Yeah, I've seen that one. That's Naomi Watts and Ewan McGregor, isn't it? With a young Tom Holland in there as well as the son. Gary Evans, Titanic, probably the most successful disaster movie in the world ever. It's still one of the most highest grossing films of all time. Alan Day says, I can't remember the name, but the plane crash in the Andes Mountains where the rugby team eats the dead. I think that was Alive, wasn't it? I do remember that. Nicky Hobbs, Wolf Creek. Again, it's a film that I own, I haven't seen. I didn't know that was a true story, to be honest, so it's in my horror section, I think, so I might have to have a look at that. Jason Paris, well, you know when you hear from Jason Paris, he's only got one suggestion. Has to be Flash Gordon. Well done, Jason. Good to see you still on form, boy. Chris Benton, 127 Hours, great film. Horrible to sense the true story part of it, though. Again, it's a film I have, but I haven't watched. That's James Franco again, isn't it? And isn't it directed by Trainspotting director Danny Boyle? Got a feeling. I know a lot about the films, but not the films. So anyway, that was your suggestions, and none of you suggested Everest, which astounded me actually. So yeah, this week's film is Everest, and I will start to talk about that now. Okay, before I get into discussing Everest, I'd first of all like to ask you all, if you are listening here, just please pause the podcast, go to wherever you are listening to this now, please give us a rating, leave a review, subscribe to us, do whatever you can to help promote and support this podcast. But it's something I'm really passionate about, so I do want to keep on going. I do love talking about films. So please, yes, if there's anywhere you can support us, whether it's Spotify, Audible, Podchaser, Google Podcasts, whatever, wherever you are, please go along and give us a 5-star review. That'd be great. Also go over to YouTube, find us over there. There's exclusive videos, there'll be different videos. Also, I do edit the podcasts into pictorial podcasts just for a bit of fun, so you can catch up on some of the old podcasts with me and Nath and me and my brother. over on there as well. So yeah, any way you could support us, please go and do that. That would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, let's get on with discussing Everest 2015. So Everest tells the story of the 1996 disaster when an unexpected storm hit the mountain on May the 10th and 11th of that year, leaving 8 people dead. It's the tallest mountain in the world. It is a dangerous place and not to be taken lightly. And this film sort of looks quite closely, and it's quite an accurate portrayal as well. There's a couple of books you can read. I've read John Krakauer's Into Thin Air. I've also seen a documentary all about it, and the director of the film, Baltasar Kormakur, and the screenwriters William Nicholson and Simon Beaufoy have tried to be as accurate and true to life as they can. So they've listened to sort of all tapes of interviews with the people. They've not actually gone from the books, because there's a book by John Krakauer and there's a book by Beck Weathers, 2 of the people who were there to survive it, and their stories differ. Everyone's stories sort of differ because, that's how life is, isn't it? Real life is everyone's own portrayal of events. So the writers have sort of taken in every account and tried to leave it ambiguous. They haven't been pointing any fingers. They're not, it's not trying to make statements. It's just trying to show, as close as possible how it all turned out. So yeah, as I mentioned, the director Baltasar Kormakur, he's an Icelandic director. He's usually more into his action movies, films like Two Guns, Beast, Contraband, and I think it shows in this film. It feels slightly glossy, feels slightly Hollywood. The musical score throughout, I think, makes it feel a bit more cinematic, sort of like an action score almost, But the actors involved do give some outstanding and sort of true performances. It's a great cast. I'll touch on that in a minute. The screenwriters, William Nicholson, he's known for writing many screenplays, including Gladiator and the screenplay for Les Miserables. Simon Beaufoy, he wrote 127 Hours that we mentioned earlier, and Slumdog Millionaire and The Full Monty. So yeah, he's had lots of experience as well. The film had a budget of 55 million and it made 203 million at the box office. So not so a successful movie by all accounts. So the film starts with an opening blurb. It says, since Edmund Hillary and Tenzin Norgay reached the top in 1953, there's been many professional expeditions following suit. And out of those climbs, 1 in 4 climbers perished on the mountain. That's how dangerous it is. And these are professional people. In 1990, it doesn't say this, in 1990, Rob Hall begins Adventure Consultants, giving opportunities to a more commercial, client-based expeditions. So rich people with not necessarily all the mountain experience that they should have can sort of pay for the privilege to go up. Now this worked well. The first commercially guided expedition up to Everest was in 1992, guided by Rob Hall. By 1996, by this year that the film takes place, there were 20 expedition groups on the mountain. They're all trying to climb and summit the mountain in the same 2-week window, because there really is only a short amount of time in the year. I think a maximum of 4-week window where it's safe to get to the top of Everest. So it's getting ridiculous up there. It's getting busy. It's commercial. Now, you don't always hear this when you hear about Everest and mountain climbing. A lot of the mountain climbing documentaries you watch, even when they are telling a tragic story, they tend to romanticize the mountain. And I think even in this film it's romanticized. It's an impressive thing, because after the blurb it cuts to an image of Rob and Nat climbing up the mountain, and the camera pans away from them as they're climbing, and there's this massive impressive shot. You see the scale, you see them just turning into tiny little dots on the side of this huge mountain, Everest. And there it is, and that's the title, Everest. Now at Mount Everest, it's It borders Nepal and China, with most people sort of choosing to come up it from Nepal. And to give you an idea of how tall this mountain is, it's 8,849 metres high, which is over 29,000 feet. To give you an idea of that scale, that's 5.5 vertical miles. So, like I said, I've read a couple of the books about it. It feels like this romantic, it's almost like a siren beckoning these climbers, isn't it? You know, was it George Mallory who was asked, why would you want to climb Everest? And he said, because it's there. And, you know, when you see the title sequence and you see the Everest, it just does look impressive. You do think that would be an amazing accomplishment to get up there. But what we have to remember is that it's not as straightforward as that, is it? This mountain is so tall that it almost pierces the atmosphere. You know, by the time you get up to there, the oxygen levels are so low that it's impossible for us to survive. We'll get into that a bit later on as it happens in the story. I'm going to go through the sort of story step by step and we'll take it from there. But yeah, I've read a few books about the subject, the topic, and a couple of them are really good. There's a book called Death Zone by Matt Dickinson. Now, he was a producer over at ITV who was there on that mountain that year. He went over there with Brian Blessed. I think it was Brian Blessed's third attempt to climb Everest. And he wanted to make a documentary. And this Matt Dickinson said, oh, yeah, I'll be up for that. I've climbed Snowdon. When he hadn't even climbed Snowdon, I don't think he'd even summited Snowdon when he'd attempted it. But his book sort of tells it from the perspective of a layman's man, you know. And he was a bit under the impression that by the time he's, you know, on the mountain, he's thinking, why am I doing this? What, you know, this is not safe. I shouldn't be here. He does actually go on to summit the mountain. I don't think that Brian Blessed made it. But his portrayal of the mountain is very honest. He says about the filth, the clutter, the overpopulation up there. You know, if you go to the toilet up sort of into the higher areas, it just stays there. It doesn't decompose. There's nothing to decompose it, so it stays there. And the same with all the bodies. There's bodies littered up there, hundreds of them. I think there's like, at this point in 1996, I think there was like 150 bodies up there already, you know. So now there is hundreds and hundreds, but there's no way of rescuing people. You can't get helicopters up above a certain height. You're struggling on your own to get up and down when you're into the sort of the lower oxygen levels. So yeah, it really is a dangerous place. So at this point in 1996, the first cracks in the commercialisation of Everest are beginning to show. Hasn't stopped it, you know, it's still going on now. Lots of different commercial expeditions going up there all constantly. But at this point, it's starting to show. Now, Rob Hall was a New Zealander. He started the Adventure Consultants is the group that he started. So he had been influenced by Edmund Hillary, obviously, who was the first man to top the summit. He was also a Kiwi. So when Rob sort of spoke to Edmund Hillary about his plans to take people up there, he thought Edmund Hillary would be like, oh, that's great, you know. Rob's thinking it's giving the opportunity, more people the opportunity, but Edmund Hillary sort of shot him down in flames and said, you know, you shouldn't be trivialising this mountain. She is a beast. It shouldn't be a commercial venture. And it sort of knocked Rob for six a bit. But none of this is in the film. Anyway, this is just me filling in a bit in the background. Hope you don't mind. But anyway, so the opening scene, as I said, we sort of show them panning up to the mountain. Then it's the title sequence, and then it cuts and it says 6 months earlier, and we're in New Zealand at first, where we're seeing the characters sort of just loading up at the airport. They're just about to get on the flight, and this gives us an opportunity to see Rob Hall saying goodbye to his wife, Jan, who's played by Keira Knightley. Rob Hall, by the way, is played by Jason Clarke. Now, Rob Hall's a big guy, big beardy guy. He's safety conscious, he's kind, he's generous, but he does things by the book. You know, his goal really is to give people this experience in the safest way possible. He wants to bring them all back. Jan Hall, she's been up Everest with him. in their expedition in 1993. They were the second husband and wife team to ever summit Everest. So as I say, she's played by Keira Knightley. Keira Knightley in this. I think this is the only scene we see her standing up. Every other scene, because of the time difference between Nepal and New Zealand, whenever Rob is contacting her, it's daytime for him and she is fast asleep in bed, So the most of her work in this film is lying in a bed on a telephone. But, this is how it would have happened. So Gyllenhaal is pregnant and she's, there's a bit of a cheesy line. It gets the point across, but it does feel a bit sort of tropey when she says, be back, make sure you're back for the birth. And he said, you try and stop me or something, or nothing could stop me, something to that effect. And it's a bit like, ooh, it's like when, in a horror film, when someone leaves a room and they say, I'll be right back. They're not coming back, and it's set up like that. A bit obvious. That's what I mean about this film. There is a few bits that make it feel a bit Hollywood and a bit glamorised. Now, we also meet Helen Wilton, played by Emily Watson, and Guy Cotter, played by Sam Worthington. Now, Sam Worthington, I think, is a Kiwi, isn't he? Emily Watson, she's a brilliant actress. So she's playing Helen Wilton, who is going to be sort of the head of base camp. Now, in real life, Helen Wilton hadn't had a lot of experience with this sort of thing. I think the director in the director's commentary mentions that the real Helen Wilton, had won a competition to go and help at base camp. So she got on the team sort of late in the day. But it feels like a nice family unit. They all get on really, really well. There's a lot of appreciation for each other. They're a good team and everyone feels like they're in safe hands when they go in. We cut then to Kathmandu Airport in Nepal. So there's a lot of location work in this film. A lot sort of the Nepal, they use the authentic locations of Nepal on the way up to base camp. They don't get as far as base camp. Base camp and the mountains above are filmed in Italy, in sort of wintry alpine mountains over there. The base camp was set up near Rome. They actually got some real Sherpas. The people who would actually set up base camp each year, they got them to go over to Rome and recreate base camp for the film. So there's a lot of sort of consultancy and, they speak to the actual people, Gyllenhaal, Guy Cotter, to sort of make sure that this film is as authentic as it could possibly be. So anything sort of on the side of the mountain is Italy, where they can film them actually hiking in real conditions, film the cast and crew actually getting up there. And then anything above the top 3,000 feet, so that's the Hillary Step, South Col, the balcony, etc., it's all done with green screen. And the director says they brought snow in for the production and blew real snow in on them. Whereas one of the actresses, can't remember who it was, I think it's the girl who plays the Japanese girl, she's mentioned about they use salt in the film and they're blowing salt into their faces, which sort of, it was cheaper than getting in snow apparently. Anyway, but they, creating the death zone in a soundstage, they can control and replicate the elements. It's safer, it's cheaper, and it's set in front of a green screen, so they can do a lot of green screen work and try and make it look as authentic as they can. Doesn't always work. Some shots look a bit too sort of computerized. You can always tell when there's a green screen shot because the camera tends to just go 360 around them, and it doesn't always look great. Anyway, so we're now at Kathmandu Airport. We meet 3 Yankees that turn up. Doug Hansen, played by John Hawkes. This is his second attempt to get up Everest. We learn throughout the film that he's a postman. He's working 3 jobs to afford this trip, and Rob has also given him a deal for a return. He's an ordinary guy. He's working his heart off, getting funding from the locals. He's giving talks at the elementary school. They've given him a flag to take up. He's just a down-to-earth, normal person who's got this opportunity to go. He's been there before. He didn't quite summit, so this time he's coming back and he wants to do it. Then we meet Beck Weathers, who's a pathologist, and he mountaineers, as we find out, to ward off depression, but you wouldn't get that from him. He's sort of this confident, impatient, he's almost cocky. He says, I'm a Texan 100%. And he's one of the writers of one of the books. He wrote a book called Left for Dead, which was all about his story, as we'll find out as we discuss the film what happens with him. And then he sort of says to Doug, why didn't you just go and do it? If I could see the summit, I'd just push on and just do it. And then Rob interjects and says, he pays me to get him down safely, so you would do the same. You can get all that way, but it just doesn't make sense to push on if it's not safe. And then the third American we meet is John Krakauer. Now, John Krakauer, he is a journalist for Outdoor Magazine. He's played by Michael Kelly in the film. Beck Weathers, was played by Josh Brolin. But John Krakauer, he wrote the book of his Everest experience, Into Thin Air. He also wrote the book Into the Wild, which the film is based on, all about McCandless. We mentioned that earlier. So he's on board to sort of document the climb and showcase the expedition and the adventures consultants. As I said, all the location work here is actually filmed in Kathmandu. Now, Kathmandu is nearly 5,000 metres above sea level to start with, so already there's a thinner air up there, there's less oxygen, and all the crew who are helping to film the film had to handball all the gear themselves, and their altitude sickness was rife amongst the crew to get these shots. As the crew, now the whole team, adventure consultants, everyone who's come in together from New Zealand or from America or from Japan, they all now meet up in this cafe where Rob gives them the sort of introductory talk. And this is where we meet more of the team, including the Japanese climber Yasuko Namba. Now, she's the second woman to climb all 7 summits, all the highest mountain on each continent. So at this point, she's done 6, and Everest is going to be her 7th mountain. When we meet these people, you can see that they're all geared up, and Rob is giving this talk. They all feel pretty confident in Rob. You can see that, he's earned a lot of respect from his safety first, and he tells them we're going to be summiting on the 10th, which is a lucky day for us. But this is where Rob then describes the death zone, which, is a part of the mountain, as I said, which is over 8,000 metres, 26,000 feet. Only 14 mountains in the world sort of reach and go beyond this. As soon as you get up over that death zone, the oxygen is that thin. Rob says, this is the cruising altitude of a 747. Put that in your mind. When you see planes flying over, all that way up, and little specks, that is how high the top of Everest is. It's crazy, isn't it? So your body just starts to, you start to die up there. Your body, you're not getting the oxygen, your body is breaking down. So that's why it's so important to take oxygen. There's a third of the oxygen levels as there are down at sea level. So once he's given his talk, we see then a montage of the trek up to base camp. It continues. A lot more location work. There's some awesome shots. At this point, it's all real. Great panoramas. Cinematographer Salvador Totino, he has worked a lot with directors such as Ron Howard. He's worked with Oliver Stone on Any Given Sunday. He was the cinematographer behind films such as Spider-Man Homecoming, Bird Box, and there is some amazing shots of this absolutely rugged yet beautiful landscape. You see the village on the edge of the mountain. You see the massive rope bridges. The director, in the director's commentary, points out, he says, look, you see in this shot it's like lovely and blue sky. In the next shot it's snowing. He says our continuity editors was like, oh, we can't have that. And then the director says, no, we are keeping this because this is how interchangeable it is up there. We want to show that. So many would have had a continuity hell, but director Cormac liked the realism, so it was captured well as it was. We see in this montage as well that the traditional customs, like the hikers passing through and getting blessings at the monastery, and then we start to see the people going past the memorial. I think it's called the Mound. It's a memorial to all the people who have died up there, and there is lots of have been lots of people die up on Everest, and many of them are still up there now because you can't. The bodies can't be retrieved. and they're up there and they're not decomposing. I mean, George Mallory's body is up there, and that's been over there, up there for now 100 years, and it's still up there, and he's still got his skin on him. He's been eaten by birds and that, but he's there. He's this pasty body. There's a part of the mountain up on Everest called Rainbow Valley, and it's called that because it's littered with bodies who have died at that part, and they're all in their colourful sort of hiking mountaineering coats, and it's been named Rainbow Valley, which is quite a sombre, ominous sort of part. It's an area below the Northern Ridge, and obviously it lies in the death zone. So this is where it sort of focuses on Beck, and I think in the real story, this is where Beck was beginning to be not gung-ho and starting to sort of sense the real danger of what he was doing. He starts to sort of awaken as he watches this Sherpa being carried off the side of the mountain. And I mean, the Sherpas, Nepalesian people, so they're more accustomed to the higher altitudes. That's why we have the Sherpas to help carry all the things up. They're not the servants, they're not slaves, they're paid for their jobs, and they're respected as part of the team. So after the montage and that, then we get up to base camp. Now, by the time the team gets up there, Helen is already there. She's set up camp, so we meet her again. She's like a sort of a motherly character. She's quite friendly. As I said, Emily Watson just has that. She's just got that down-to-earth sort of character about her anyway, doesn't she? And in this, she is a sort of a friendly, motherly type. And it gives a good sense, again, of this family-orientated outfit. She says in real life, this tragedy deeply affected her because she wasn't hardened to this sort of ordeal. A lot of the climbers, they go up and they expect this sort of, tragedy is completely possible. When when they talk about safety on Everest, it's never safe, but it's as safe as they could possibly make it. Whereas with Helen, she was thrown into this situation, and to have to deal with all this grief. These are people that she's become friends with, that this story affects. So yeah, it's a real heartbreaking time for her, a real heartbreak. It must be to revisit this and to relive this memory. Must take a big toll on the heart, sort of thing. So yeah, we're up here now at the base camp. Already it's busy. We see rubbish. Rob's picking up the rubbish. We hear some groups, I think it's a South African group, talking about this slapdash approach to how they're going to get up there. Apparently the South African hiking leader in real life was quite a horrible man. He was a bit of a fraudster. He says he'd accomplished all these things, but he hadn't. He mistreats his crew. He mistreats other people. They're very self-centered, he was. And he even mistreated the Sherpas. So the director, in the director's commentary again, he says that the South Africans actually, they didn't even make it up to the summit. I don't think they even got up to Camp 4 because they weren't strong enough, they weren't experienced enough. So it was all a bit of bullshit. He took the money off of his clients to get them up there, and they didn't really have it in them to get there as it was. We also now, this is where we meet Scott Fischer, who is another expedition leader for another commercial outfit called Mountain Madness. Now, Scott Fischer's played here by Jake Gyllenhaal with a very impressive beard. If I could grow a beard like that, I would. Mine's a bit more wispy like Rob's is in the film, like Jason Clarke's. But we're not here to talk about beards. So he's a bit more of a free spirit, a bit more of a bit wild, a bit more untamed. His group, his right-hand man, is like this sort of grizzly Russian climber. He's played by an Icelandic actor who's also friends with the director, worked with the director in the past. I thought he'd had this sort of Germanic look, he looks sort of a big guy. Another bloke who's on their team is a chap called Tim Goodman Hall. Now, I always recognise him. Whenever I see him in anything, I'm like, oh, it's that bloke from The Office. He's not one of the main characters in The Office. In Ricky Gervais's office, he just turns up in it when Ricky Gervais is interviewing him and another girl, and he wants to give the girl the job, and he's not really paying any attention to this bloke, and that's that Tom Goodman Hall. So he turns up in this film. So Rob and Scott, anyway, they're friends. There's a bit of a competitive rivalry. You get the idea that John Krakauer wanted to go with one or the other, and they sort of both bidding to take John with them. It's going to be good promotion for their group, isn't it? You know, to have this writer write his book about Everest with whoever's expedition force he's going with. But in the end, he did ultimately choose to go with Rob, and Scott Fischer sort of makes a little bit of a jab at Rob about that. But, you know, ultimately there is a competitive rivalry, but they are friends. They do later on sort of team up. But when Rob is sort of speaking to Scott, saying it's busy up here this year, you know, and Rob sort of voices his concerns, and then Scott shrugs and says, well, you know, some crazy Kiwi showed us this could be done. So, you know, now I'm here to make money, just like everyone else is, you know. So Rob was sort of, I guess he feels responsible for how it's all going. There's a lot of people doing the same thing that he was, and, you know, probably those words that Edmund Hillary had said to him as well probably ring true. They don't mention this in the film. That was something I'd read somewhere else as well. But, you know, it's probably got to have some sort of an effect on him, a bit of a guilt complex. And so Rob is the one who sort of wants to make sure that everyone's working together and everyone is safe up there, you know. So the next sort of section of the film, they're talking about the acclimatization. So once you're up to base camp, you're there for a day or two to get used to those oxygen levels, and then you climb up to Camp 1. I think you spend a night at Camp 1, and then you come back down, and then you go up to Camp 2, and then you come down, and up to Camp 3, etc, etc. So you're climatizing in stages. You're getting your body used to these altitudes to combat altitude sickness, of course, because there's no climatizing at the top. So when you're ready for the top, you want to get up to Camp 4, and you've just got to make a mad dash up into the death zone, summit, and then come back down as quick as you can. Because altitude sickness, you know, it's divided into 3 syndromes: acute mountain sickness, high altitude cerebral edema, and high altitude pulmonary edema. So acute mountain sickness it's like an alcoholic hangover. It's a headache, usually accompanied by dizziness, fatigue, nausea, occasionally vomiting. High altitude cerebral edema, confusion, drowsiness, similar to being drunk. And then high altitude pulmonary edema, its initial symptoms include chest congestion, coughs, exaggerated shortness of breath on exertion, decreased exercise performance, and if it's untreated, it can progress to dyspnea, and respiratory distress, often with bloody sputum. And so you see this montage of them acclimatizing to the altitude sickness, and you actually see someone, not one of Rob's crew, I think, but he sort of lean over, coughing up blood. At this point as well, you're starting to see the bodies sort of dead on the mountains. You're, as it said there, you know, in high altitude pulmonary edema, you're out of breath, your performance decreases incredibly. It's hard work to get each foot in front of the other. Now, as I mentioned, I do hike a lot. I had a hiking channel. I've done mountains. Every time you're on a mountain, and this is me talking about mountains, I've only done, you know, the tallest mountains I've done is over in Romania, in the Carpathians. But whenever you're climbing a mountain, it is literally, as you're going up the side, you're like, oh, why am I doing this? You know, it's hard work. I find it hard. I sort of do so many steps, stop, take a look around, have a breath. That's without altitude sickness coming into play. So, you know, these people are strong people. You've got to be in a good place to do this. You start to see that they're struggling. Doug's beginning to struggle, the postman. He's out of breath. So once they come back down to base camp, then he's having checkups, and you see Beck in there as well. You know, everyone's got to keep fit for the whole time, and they're going to nurse on there to sort of keep checking these people up. This is where Beck recognises that, you know, he realises they're talking about his wife, and then he's like, oh God, it's my anniversary. So all these things actually happened on the actual event. So Beck's like, oh God, I forgot my wife's anniversary. She's going to kill me. So he goes to use the fax machine, and Rob's like, "Oh, use the satellite phone, mate. Go and phone her." Helen's like, "Rob, it's like $25 a minute." "Oh, I'll pay that. That's all right." And then Rob says, No, it's on us." So again, you get that idea that Rob is a generous type. You know, he's not just giving that phone call to Beck, he's also given Doug a discounted thing just to make sure that Doug can come, and, you know, his generosity is his weakness, as we find out later. So we see Beck now, he's phoning his wife. She's played by Robin Wright Penn. Her name's Peach. And you see her at home on the phone. We hear that Beck had told his wife he was going to stop all this mountaineering, but he'd already booked Everest at the time, but he says he failed to mention it to her. So she's not very happy with him. Looks like their marriage is on the rocks. You see the two children in the background. One of the children, the son, is actually the son of the director. So now you've got two wives at home now. You've got Keira Knightley and you've got Peach. So we carry on now into the higher areas, and they get to the Kumba Icefall. Now this is it's basically a massive glacier, and it is massive, you know, and there's these ladders they have to put up to get across these crevasses. You know, a glacier is basically ice feeding down the mountain, so it's always moving. You can hear it creaking. I've been on a glacier over in New Zealand, the Franz Josef Glacier. I've done some hiking there. That was eerie enough. It wasn't until we were up there and you're looking down these crevasses and someone said, "You don't want to go down there. If you go down there, you'll never come out," sort of. And in Everest again, obviously it's higher again, so they say that there's like columns of ice taller than sort of tower blocks all around you, and they're moving. There's constantly avalanches. There's a scene here now where Beck is crossing the ladder, and then there's an avalanche, and then the ladder slips, and Beck is like falling for his life. Obviously this is filmed in a studio. It doesn't look too bad at this point. Like I say, some of the climbing shots look great. Some of it really, you know, the composite shots are fantastic. You can tell they're in a green screen, but they're put onto this 3D sort of image of Everest. Obviously they can't get the shots that they'd like to up there. You can't get any helicopter shots up there, you know, so they've got to do what they got to do. But as I said, sometimes it just looks a bit too much, and I think the overuse of the 360 sort of destroys the illusion almost, you know. But anyway, yeah, Beck almost falls off this ladder. This didn't happen as it is. They added this scene to make it a bit more action-packed, to give you a bit of grip, you know, a little bit of a hook in between the build-up of the story. There was a comment in John Krakauer's book where he says about Beck struggling on the ladders, and also the Japanese girl as well, Yasuko, she struggled on the ladders. So they've just added this scene. It's borrowing from the truth a little bit, you know, building on the truth. So when Beck gets down, he snaps a bit and he's like, "God, Rob, I didn't pay you $65,000 to get me, you know, to get me killed. I've paid you to keep me safe." So that's how much, you know, it costs someone to go and do this. So it is just a playground for the rich, really, you know. And then they sort of get, also at this point, you know, before he falls on the ladder, they're there for a long time, because it's, again, there's overcrowding. So there's limited preparation for a lot of these teams, and they don't know what they're doing up there. And the more amateur teams are getting in the way of the professionals, and then it's building these hold-ups and queues on the mountains, which isn't ideal up at that level, at those temperatures, in the winds. It must be absolutely freezing up there in those conditions. So this is why Rob, he comes back to base camp and he calls a meeting with all the other groups, because he feels responsible to keep these people safe. And he says, you know, he suggests a rota, which puts a few noses out of joint. The South Africans are the first to sort of say, "Who the hell do you think you are?" You know, and they leave. They're not going to go ahead with anything like that. You know, first come, first serve, they're sort of thinking. And a lot of people are thinking, yeah, who made you king of this mountain, you know? But like I said, he probably feels this responsibility, and so he should. Okay, so then, you know, this is where now they're going to approach Camp 4, and they're about to tackle the summit. This is where now the oxygen comes into play. So there's a really nice shot, actually. I think it's the same shot as we see at the beginning, where they're climbing up the side of the mountain. It pans away, and it just gives you the scale of this mountain. And you see the climbers, as I said, they're turning into specks, but you can see Camp 4, and it's like this tiny little rash of colourful pinpricks, which is, the tents. It just a really nice shot. So there are some great shots in here. A lot of the CG work does work really well. So they're camping out at Camp 4. They're hiding from the weather. Beck and the postman, Doug, they start to talk a bit about, that what pursues them, what makes them pursue the mountains. And Doug reveals he's doing this for the school. He's got their flag to put up. And Beck says that he's... he does this to keep the demons at bay as such. He faces a lot of depression, and when he's on the mountains, it's all gone. And, there's a lot to be said for that, isn't there? Doctors now prescribe hiking as a medication to fight depression. They'd sooner tell you to go out for a good walk than to take antidepressants, which, so there's a good argument behind what Beck is saying. But then I think it's 2 a.m. and they're about to rise to go out, and Rob opens up the tent and says, come and look at this. And it's a pale moonlight, and they're looking up at this mountain, and it's serene and it's silent. It's just a real impressive shot. And the serenity, it almost beckoning them to come and climb. It's seductive, isn't it? It's almost like a siren calling them up. So then this is it now. They're about to make the summit. This is where the catalogue of errors begin. The idea of them leaving at 2 a.m. is so that they get past the dangerous bits before the ice thaws, and it gives them time to get up to the summit. I think they have a 2 p.m. deadline cut off. If they're not on the summit by 2, they got to turn around to make sure they're back down for safe. So they get up there, and already they get to the first point. I think it's at the bottom of the Hillary step, and the ropes aren't there. Someone's removed the ropes, or they haven't been put up. So already the team have to stop and start to put ropes up themselves. And a lot of people are sort of stood behind thinking, having to stand on the edge of this mountain. There's a nice shot here where the camera pans up and you sort of look as they're working their way along this tiny ledge, and then you look down and you just see the vast scale of the mountains beneath them. Doug is already at this point, he's struggling. He gets left behind. Beck, he's had an eye operation in the past, and his eyes are playing up and he can't see, and he's sort of like, Rob says to Rob, I've got to stop, I've got to stay here. Rob says, okay, well, you wait here and we'll send the next Sherpas to come down. You go down with them. But there's a bit of miscommunication here, and this is in true life. Beck was under the assumption that Rob had told him to wait for his return, whereas Rob, and Jan, his wife in real life, has backed this up. She said Rob would never have said that, because Beck will have to wait there for hours. It's going to be hours and hours before Rob's up and down, and you're waiting up there in the death zone in those freezing conditions, in that biting wind. No way Rob has said that. He would have said, then go with the next people to come. So we see many people passing Beck sort of on the way down. A lot of people now are deciding it's not safe. They're telling Rob, we're going to go back. We're not hanging around up here. And you can see Rob's disappointed that, they people have paid a lot of money to do this, but it's safe. They want to get down safe. And, for that reason, these people have survived this. But Rob keeps going up. Doug is coming up. Scott, at this point, Jake Gyllenhaal's character, he's struggling on the mountain as well. And his team sort of are one of the first up on the top of the summit. John Krakau as well summits with them, obviously, because now they're working together, the two teams. Yasuku Namba, she finally reaches the summit. This is it. She's done all seven of the summits. And there's an elation. This is a real high point of the movie. Everyone is happy as they're achieving their accomplishments. Rob's up there congratulating them. They're holding the flags, they're taking the photos, celebrating with each other. It's a real good sort of a feel-good time. Scott has made it up there. But yeah, something's not right with Jake Gyllenhaal's character, he's really struggling, and he's the mountain leader. He's supposed to be the one in charge of that team, and he's an accomplished climber. He's got a great reputation, but I think there's something to do with kidney failure. At one point, when I first watched this film, I thought he had like diabetes, because you see him ejecting something at some point, but that's what they call Dex, and it's a mountaineering drug to help eliminate and battle the onset of acute mountain sickness. So as now people are coming down, they pass Doug just coming up, so you can see the summit there, and Doug's like, "Oh, I gotta go, Rob," and Rob's like, "No, Doug, turn it around, bud. We're not going up there now. We've missed the deadline. 2 p.m.'s gone. We're going down." And Doug's like, "Rob, I can see it. I've come all this way. I can't come back again. I can't afford to do this again." And this is where Rob's generosity gets the better of him. And in real accounts, true accounts, people said that Rob stayed to talk with Doug, and when they looked back, they saw Rob and Doug heading up to the summit. So Rob's gone back on his own sort of safety laws to ensure that Doug gets to see that summit. And it's at this point you see Rob and Doug heading back up, and then it cuts down to Sam Worthington, and I think he's on another mountain. He's part of the expedition, but he's doing another mountain, and he looks up to Everest, and he just sees this storm coming from around the back. So he phones through to Jan and says, "I can't get hold of Rob." No, not Jan, Helen. He says, "There's still people on the summit. That's not our lot, is it?" And at this point the film suggests that it is Rob and Doug. So Helen's trying to get hold of Rob as well. No one can get hold of him. Radios work up there to an extent, but it is mountain conditions, and every now and again, you cut out, you can't get hold of each other. We see Rob's man Andy, then he's come down to the south summit, and he's gone to get his new oxygen can, because there's a lot of confusion with the oxygen. They sort of stash bottles here and there, and then you take a full one up, and then you bring a half one down, and you leave half ones at the summit to bring down, and then you drop the half one and pick up a full one. It sounded confusing. I couldn't get my head around it. And when I listened to the director's commentary, I thought, he might explain it a little bit better. But he just sort of said, there is confusion. It sounds confusing. If you think it's confusing what they're trying to say is going on, just because on the day there was confusions. So Andy gets down to take the new bottle, and all these bottles are empty. And when Rob then is trying to come down with Doug, and Doug's run out of oxygen and he's collapsing, he's got no energy, Rob finally gets hold, Helen and Rob finally get in communication with each other, and she says, "Where are you, Rob? We need oxygen, we're on the Hillary step." And she's like, "Oh, okay, I'll get someone to meet you at the bottom of the Hillary step." And he says, no, we're at the top of the Hillary step. And suddenly now this is where you see the realisation on Helen's face, and this is where for this poor girl it's all unravelling. She's been put in charge to keep this all going, and now it's all out of her hands. All these people on the mountain, a storm's coming up, it hits base camp first, everything is going wrong. They can't get hold of Beck, he's sort of left for dead at this point. Yasuko as well at this point, she's still trapped up on the mountain. She's with Beck, they've left her with Beck, and she's got an empty oxygen mask, and she's passed out. And when this storm hits, it's almost instantaneous, and I can vouch for that from my own experience. When me and a friend was up on, we'd done Scaffold Pike in the UK, England's tallest mountain, and we went over to the mountain next to it, Ling Mel. We were sat on the top of this mountain just sort of having a break, and we were looking out across this valley, and it was a most beautiful day. And I turned around and we just saw this black cloud approaching us, and we had our stuff everywhere, like, quick, get our stuff on, we got to get off this mountain before that hits. But by the time we'd put our backpacks and that, it was there, it was on us immediate. And that was not even 1,000 metre tall mountain, so imagine what it's like 8,000 metres up. It just you can't imagine it. You can't. It's just unbelievable. And these storms are intense. So Scott now as well is also exhausted, and he's suffering from high altitude pulmonary edema. Rob is trying to help Doug descend, but then there's this blizzard that hits. So people are falling left, right and centre. As they're descending down the mountain, then they reach Beck, and there's Yasuko is left with Beck as these three climbers go to get help. Andy Harris, he gets up and he reaches Rob with a spare oxygen cylinder, but by the time he's got up there, Doug, he's gone. They were stuck on a ledge, and Rob has turned his back said to Doug, you stay here, but Doug's detached his guideline and he's fallen off the mountain. You know, it is all going tits up here. So Andy gets back to Rob with the oxygen, but they can't get the oxygen can open. So they're stuck there together in this storm. The storm at this point is beating on the top of this mountain. All these people are still in the death zone. And, you know, one by one, they're all getting picked off by this mountain. Rob falls asleep. Andy starts to have, you know, he's getting affected by the altitude sickness. He's starting to see things and he's overheating. They say earlier in the film that people get so cold that they think they're hot and they just start stripping off their clothes. So that's what Andy does. He starts taking off his clothing and then he falls off the mountain. It's not until the morning that Helen and, you know, they're at base camp. The worst of the storm's over. You know, they don't know who's up there. They don't know who's managed to survive. And then all of a sudden the radio comes alive and it's Rob. Rob's finally got hold of them. So at this point, Rob is, you know, he survived the night up there, but he is frozen solid. He's frostbitten, can't feel his hands. He's without oxygen. He's got no energy. He's done for. But, you know, to have survived on that mountain overnight, you know how the temperature just plummets at night, especially up at that altitude, that close to space. It's sort of a testament really to Rob's, I don't know, his fitness, to the gear that they're all wearing as well, I suppose. But yeah, just for him to have survived that, and that's what's so tragic, is that he's so close yet so far, you know. And they're sort of saying to him on the phone, over the radios, Rob, can you get down? Can you come down? And he's like, I can't move. So this is where they decide they're going to try and phone Jan and get her to coax Rob down. And they put Jan into communication with Rob, hoping that she will be able to beckon him down. But basically, he just sort of says, you know, when the baby's born, call it Sarah. And he passes away. So returning camp, people are coming back past and they find Beck and Yasuko and they think that they're dead. You know, they're not going to be able to rescue them. They leave them for dead. Helen even calls Beck's wife and informs her of the situation. But then, and this is you know, it is a miracle. It is miraculous that this happened. But Beck, sort of all of a sudden he stirs. He says in his book, in his memoirs, that he saw his family on the mountain with him saying, come on, you can do this, come to us. And he gets up and he walks down to Camp 4. And people can't believe it. As he walks in, he's all frostbitten. I think he's lost his nose. He has lost his nose. There's a book called The Dark Summit, and there's a story in there where someone had lost their glasses and someone else goes up, recovers Beck's glasses and gives them to these climbers and says, here, use Beck's goggles, and his nose is still in the goggles. But yeah, he gets down to Camp 4. People have thought he was dead, but no, here he is, he's alive. They put him in a tent, but they can't rescue him, they can't get him down. But in the film, I don't know if this is true or not, but in the film, it's Doug's wife is on the phone, phoning up the embassy saying, look, come on, I want my husband saved. They got a lot of money, they got a lot of clout, I should think. So you see the helicopter pilot going up to the 4th camp, which has never been done. You know, it's not something they can do. It's really dangerous. He puts his own life in danger just to rescue Beck, which is unbelievable because no one else gets rescued up there, you know. But they get up there and they manage to rescue him and get him down. The helicopter driver as well, helicopter pilot, sorry, he is the pilot who features in the beginning of the film, is the actual pilot. And they use him in the film. But yeah, so at this point, you know, Scott's dead, Rob's dead, Doug's dead, Andy's dead, Yasuko is dead. So yeah, up until this point in history, this was the most tragic day on Everest. But as I mentioned a minute ago, this book, Dark Summit, actually tells the story of another day in 2006, which saw more people die again, and this day wasn't even there wasn't even hit by a storm. The conditions were perfect for summiting, but again, it was overpopulation and just hold-ups and miscommunications and too many groups being there and people counting heads and thinking they've got all their numbers, but they're counting people from other groups. And it just says, that it's a circus up there. It's a free-for-all. It's getting crazy and it's getting lethal. So when I've done the hiking in the past and people always say, "Oh, would you like to go up Everest?" And I'm like, nah, I'm not that bothered. My kind of mountain hiking is, I want to be safe. I don't do any ridge climbs or anything like that. And films like this sort of prove to you why, and especially up at those heights. There's a line in the film where Keira Knightley says, you might as well be on the moon. And that's something that Rob always said, that, once you get into trouble up there, you're unreachable. People can't help you. If you can't help yourself, no one else can help you. You might as well be on the moon. So, it's a real tragic story, but this is the mountains, isn't it? This is what we face when we climb up these mountains. Nothing is safe. It's all unpredictable. As I said, it's a great film. I do enjoy the film. Perhaps in the hands of another director, a bit more realism. I don't know. It just feels like a Hollywood film. Do you know what I mean? I've said this a couple of times. There's a couple of shots that sort of let it down. Some sort of tropey bits that make you realise it's a film. There's a film called The North Face, which is all about Tony Kurtz, a German climber, sort of in the 30s or 40s, who climbed the Eiger. And that's another tragic story. But there's something a bit more realistic about that film than this film. It's an interesting story. There's some great performances in it. A lot of the cast are good. The characters are a bit thin in development. There's not a great deal of depth to them. It is just sort of relaying this story, trying, like I say, be as close as possible. But there is something about this film that lacks for me. It's not an awful film, but it's not a stellar film. It's not as good as it could be. But yeah, if you enjoy this sort of film, it's well worth a watch. As I said, other films like it to watch are North Face. There's some really good documentaries. My favourite mountain documentary is a documentary called Meru, which is really worth watching, which is all about Comrade Anchor and a couple of other guys summiting this mountain in Meru, called Meru, which is it's one of the last mountains, I think, to ever be summited. And, they was the ones who kept trying to attempt to make it. Well worth having a look. But anyway, that's it. That's about all I've got to say for this film. So I hope it wasn't too much of a sort of a step-by-step plot analysis. I hope I've given you some insight as well into the film and into the actual events. But yeah, that was another episode of WN Movie Talk podcast. I hope to be back with you all soon for some more, but in the meantime, please everyone, do what you can to sort of help share us. It really would be appreciated, and I will be back soon with some more movie talk. Anyway, take care everyone. I'll see you all soon. Cheers.